Hey, it's Rob with No Limit Engineering, and last week we posted up some chassis videos of stuff that was in the shop, and we had a lot of questions about, why ours are different. So I want to do this point by point every week. We're going to put up a little video. And so what I want to start with is general frame construction and geometry. If you were to look down, at one of the chassis for one of the old trucks, I got two frame rails like this, and there's typically like a cross member for the core support, and there's a cross member for the front suspension, and maybe there's a cross member for the trans mount, and there might be one about where the rear shocks are and one at the back, right? And those are called ladder frames. And it makes sense because, like if they had a couple more things in them, right, then you could have a dude crawl up here, right, with his chainsaw and trim a tree branch, right? They're ladder frames, okay? Now, I got a very simple example of a ladder frame for you, and so I try to make it about the same. And this is actually length width pretty close to a stock Chevy chassis. And ladder frames are very easy to twist, and I'll show you what I mean by this. I can use very little force, and I can twist this either way. And that's what ladder frames do when they're going down the road. Is you go over a bump, and one corner goes like this, and like this, and like this, and like this. And that's why on all the old pickups you'd see them, especially if you're off-roading, you watch the bed, tip way away from the cab. It's because the frame is flexing considerably. Now we incorporate in all our chassis an X member right through the middle, which ties both rails together and starts to make triangles, right? And triangles have been around for a long time. Matter of fact, there were old dudes in Egypt that used them to make buildings, which are still there. And if you build something like that with an X member, I can make this flex a little bit, but it takes probably 4 times the amount of force to just flex it this way. And this has the same 5 little cross members as my ladder frame. It just has the X in the middle. It's very difficult for me to flex this in comparison. So I'm going to show you why that's important. Okay, so why is it important? Well, this is frame. We look at this, got a big X member. It actually has a large drive shaft loop that we run the drive shaft through for safety. They're all NHRA legal as a drive shaft loop, so if you ever go drag racing, you can use that. But, the cab sits on here, the bed, the body is on these mounts. And one of the other things is your suspension is tied to this, and we get into the pro touring world and you want ride quality, you spend a lot of money on shocks, like this one from RideTech. Well, if you've ever seen a shock dyno, one side is mounted really rigid in this big heavy frame, and the other side has an arm on it that strokes it up and down, and you can chart exactly what the pistons inside and the valving is doing, right? But if both sides move, right, if you hit a bump and the bottom compresses some and the top flexes because the frame is flexing and the top moves, well, all the accuracy of your shock just went out the window. So if you have a frame that flexes, there's no reason to spend any money on a good shock, because it gets wasted as the upper mount flexes and the chassis flexes. You're not getting the value of the shock out of it. So if you want the performance from the shock and the suspension, those mounts which hold the upper shock and the control arm and the lower control arm and the steering rack, they have to stay in place, one plane, same as the vehicle. The other thing, if this frame is flexing and twisting, it's attached to the cab mounts, that's twisting the cab and the front sheet metal, and that's rattles in the hood shake, rattles in the doors and glass, and eventually it'll start cracking the cab if you're hardcore cornering and racing and whatnot. So having a rigid platform with a big X members tied top to bottom and all through the center is really important. And there's some frame manufacturers that do a lot of fancy stuff. They attach a lot of fancy stuff to one frame rail, and it comes back here and attaches, and then they got a lot of fancy looking stuff over here. And then if you really look at it, there's one little cross member that tie 2 sides together. It's physically the same as having one cross member go straight across. It's doing nothing extra except looks fancy. So think about the geometry that goes into the platform first. That's where you're going to start building. It's like building a house. You want a strong foundation, you build up from there.